Hi, welcome back. I'm Terry Burns, and this is a continuation of my playlist on wordplay in the Monas Hieroglyphica of John Dee. This is accompanying my course on the Monas Hieroglyphica, which is in another playlist. What I want to talk about today is one of my favorite little plays he does, and it is on Aesop's fable and the Bible conflated together into this strange little story. So let me share my screen and we will get started. Okay, you will find near the end of the letter to Maximilian that you get this Aesopian Adamic bird. And you might think, what is that? But it doesn't seem important. So, since most people are struggling to understand the whole thing, it's easy to miss these little delightful plays that just happen in a short space. So that's what we're going to look at. Let me read this section of the letter to you. It's just a paragraph. This is what Dee says. He says, "Be it enough, O you singularly dignified among all kings," that would be Maximilian, of course, "that we have here diligently demonstrated our rare gift," that is the monad. Here's the monad symbol. "So much so, by his demonstrations in the theorems yet to come, that nobody, no Aesopian bird, even one with the most scurrilous, petulant, and envious tongue, can grumble about it." Now, surely almost everyone who goes through the public school systems knows Aesop's fables. They're usually taught now as children's literature, and they have a moral. If you think of something like sour grapes as if you say, oh, that person has sour grapes, that comes from one of Aesop's fables. So before I retired, I always thought it would be kind of fun to assign students to, in 2 or 3 classes on Aesop's fable, pick your favorite fable, and then give them this and say, hey, tell me what fable he's writing about. Maybe it's a good thing I didn't get to do that, because I can imagine even the best students coming back going, there is no fable like this. And they're absolutely right. There's no Aesop's fable like this. Dee is not someone we would frequently associate with children's literature either. So we're going to talk about what Aesop's fable this might remind us of and what bird this is. Let me keep reading. He says, "For it is so great, this monad, that justly would it be free from such false accusations and indignities." We're going to talk about a false accusation fable here in a minute. "As all the most modest and most wise philosophers will grant, they will not disdain to sing with me the praise and honor of that phoenix from whose singular compassionate wings we have plucked, with fear and love, all of these theoretical plumes over and against our nudity, the introduction of Adam. With these same philosophers, we clothe ourselves to resist the cold of most cruel ignorance and shame of error, while most studiously and honorably seeking the truth." Okay, well, we probably also know the story of Adam and Eve. And since I'm talking about children's literature in the beginning part here, if kids know one Bible story, probably the ones they know are the story of Noah's Ark and the story of Adam and Eve getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden. But of course, Aesop never wrote about this bird, a phoenix, and he didn't write about Adam either. He's writing before the time of Christ. So again, let's see what's going on here. First, a little background. You probably know that Aesop was a slave in ancient Greece who wrote moral tales. They were some of the most immediately translated into Latin things. Simplified vernacular issues are among the first books translated into English, into German, into French, into Italian. They were often used to teach Latin. Here you have an Italian issue, by the way, of Aesop's moral tales. They become subjects of great works of art. Here's a detail from Fountain in Italy with the fables of the Wolf and the Crane and the Wolf of the Lamb. These are just public domain photos I took from Wikipedia. I mean, this is all over. There are artwork and translations of Aesop's fables. They're adapted all over the place, including outside of Europe. There's a manga series that are Aesop's fables. But if we narrow it down to the time Dee is writing in, we want to remember translation theory in his day is different from my day, where I'm trying to do a literal translation, finding there's a lot of wordplay. And so there are things like this that I think are fun to explain. In Dee's time, We would consider translation more an act of adaptation, that you try to see how would the story fit in this slightly different culture that you're adapting it to. So, and then you're going to have a moral. Let's say, well, I'll tell you the story of the wolf and the lamb, since we have this here. The wolf and the lamb is sometimes adapted as the cock and the crow. I think, oh, the cat and the cock, when it's adapted to France. Here's another illustration of it from the Bayeux Tapestry. And here it is in children's books. But in The Wolf of the Lamb, the story goes like this. Okay, there's this sweet little lamb, and a mean wolf comes along, and the mean wolf is really hungry. And so the mean wolf doesn't want to just eat the sweet little lamb. So the mean wolf says, oh, you have done these awful things. And they're things that the sweet little lamb couldn't possibly have done. And the lamb says, I didn't do them, really, I didn't do them. And the wolf says, yes, you did, you're guilty, and eats the lamb. It's a horrible story. It's horrible. And it's a story about false accusations and getting away with them being part of the path to tyranny. That a wolf can get away with this because the wolf is a tyrant. And when you see it as the cat and the cock, the cat gets away with it because the cat is a tyrant. If you're taking my class on the hieroglyphic monad, you know D has this symbol of the Pythagorean Y. He's appealing to Maximilian as a philosopher king and saying, you know, go up this path so you're inspired by spirit, not this other path that will wind up with you being a tyrant. That matches the moral of the wolf and the lamb. That is, power without compassion, power without knowledge leads to tyranny. Okay, now we're back to this quote. So, be it enough that we have here demonstrated nobody no Aesopian bird. Okay, well, we've hit the one on false accusations. There's no bird in there. D and Maximilian both know the habit. They are extremely, did I say extremely well-educated and well-read men. They know the habit of constantly adapting Aesop. But what happened is the morals don't change that much. They're slightly adapted, but they don't change that much. So false accusations would draw to mind a fable like The Wolf and the Lamb and the perils of tyranny, but it doesn't involve a bird. And there's no Adam in the fables, as I've mentioned, and there's no phoenix, and that's the bird we have here. In fact, Aesop has stories about eagles, cocks, cranes, crows, jackdaws, jays, and peacocks, but not a phoenix. Maybe the first thing we ought to figure out is what on earth is this bird? And that's easy. And it's not a wolf with wings, it's a peacock, because this is the Monas Hieroglyphy is Hermetic work. In it, Hermeticism has many contexts, one of which is alchemy, and the peacock's tail is a huge alchemical symbol. It is a metaphor for the phase where this oily black gunk in the alembic suddenly turns iridescent. If you think of the sun hitting an oil slick and there being kind of a rainbow in the oil slick, it's that kind of thing we're talking about here. So Coenrath, a famous alchemist of Dee's era, just slightly younger, says that the peacock as a symbol integrating all polarities may be called the soul of the world, nature, the quintessence. It causes all things to bring forth. So we're talking about a peacock. And indeed, there are Aesop's fables about peacocks. I mean, look at this bird. Isn't this it's a beautiful bird. You could just stare at it. The Aesop's fable called The Peacock goes this way. The peacock appeals to Juno to have a beautiful tail, the goddess Juno. So Juno gives the peacock a beautiful tail. Well, then the peacock finds it's having trouble flying. It doesn't like it. It complains. And it's a moral tale where the moral is be happy with what you have. The peacock got what it wanted, and it still was unhappy. Don't envy the beauty of others, be happy with what you have. Then there's another peacock story. There's the peacock and the crane. In this one, and it's another one about envy and being a bit petulant and scurrilous with those who have things you want, The crane sees the beautiful tail of this peacock, and the crane says that, oh, I want to be like that. And so it plucks some tails secretly from the peacock and attaches it to itself. Well, for all its envy, what it finds out is then after it has done all of that, other birds laugh at it because it looks stupid and it can't fly. So same moral. Be happy with what you have, don't envy others. Okay. So if we say the bird is a peacock, then why does D say phoenix? Maybe we're looking at a transition from the phase of the peacock in alchemy to a phoenix, or maybe he's adapting it to a phoenix because that is associated with the philosopher's stone. It's a common, another common symbol of this time for the philosopher's stone. That's because, of course, the phoenix rises from its own ashes, and then it goes through all these changes, and then it dies again, and then it is born again from its own ashes in this cycle, somewhat like the cycle of the Ouroboros serpent. Now, hold that thought, and let's look down here at Adam. I have another video about red and earth and Adam. And in that video, I point out that this quote right here is the first time in Dee's letter to Maximilian where he actually writes Adam in Roman letters. He says Adam as a recognizable Latin name. The time he writes Adam before, we're not sure it's Adam because he writes it in Hebrew, Aleph, Dalet, Mem, and that can also mean Edom, but you don't write vowels in Hebrew, so it can mean red, it can mean Adam, it can mean red earth, and he's playing with all these different meanings. Here, he just writes in Roman letters, Adam. So hold that thought too. Now we're going to go back to the bird, or combine the bird and Adam. One of the things we also talked about was when you are talking about Adam anagogically, and Dee says, flat out says he prefers anagogic interpretations. Those are the interpretations that have to do with spiritual ascent, the return to the one or the monad, the Gnostic ascent of the soul. Those are anagogic interpretations. And he is describing those Kabbalistically. He says it with his theorems, he's describing them mathematically, Kabbalistically, anagogically. So we might look for a bird at the top of the tree, and the tree might not be just a random tree growing in the Garden of Eden, but it might be the tree of life. I'm going to get to that in a minute. So we might think of all the parallels of a phoenix with birds that are at the top of trees, eagles in Aesop's Fables, but also things like Attar's Conference of the Birds, a big source of Chaucer in one of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, where you have a Simord bird, another work of Dee's, or a work that is attributed to Dee but may not be by him. I'm thinking of Tuba Veneris, has a direct reference to a Simord bird. Bennu birds, firebirds. So birds that ascend and then something happens and they reascend, but they are frequently thought of as at the top of the tree. So, and I've already talked about this last thing, Dee is interested in anagogic interpretations. He says so. So the first level of Adam's interpretation in the Garden of Eden story, we know, I mean, I flat out don't like it, but I know it, right? It's that Adam is doing just fine, and there's this tree, and that troublesome Eve picks the apple, eats the apple, causes all the problems that have afflicted humanity since then, and Adam and Eve are kicked out of the Garden of Eden. So that's a literal interpretation. Dee's not interested in literal interpretation. The anagogic interpretation is what we're going to look at here. So if you read this anagogically, you've got to go back to Genesis, and it will change the interpretation. Now, in my longer teaching video on this, there's a discussion about Bible and Bible translations. I'm not going to go into that here, but if you think old Bible translation, King James Version, you're not going back far enough. For one thing, the King James Bible translation is beautiful, but a very bad translation. And second, it's after this, quite a bit after this, not a century, but more like almost a century. So let's see what this would be using the Geneva Bible, which is closer to D in time and in English. So, you get in Genesis 2 that they were both naked, man and wife, and they were not ashamed. Eve doesn't have a name yet. Eve is just Adam's wife, but they are naked, and it's like that's just how they are. Eve is seduced by the serpent, and because of the serpent, she eats from the tree of life, and all these bad things happen. That's the literal translation. But if you look at this as a story anagogically, in this time, which to D would be this time is after the fall. So we're not in the Garden of Eden. Humanity has fallen from the Garden of Eden, however you consider that anagogically, which is a whole nother discussion. But we've fallen from this place of beauty, Tifereth, down here to Malkuth. Now, if you're down here and you are Eve and you're seduced by the serpent, this is the serpent that is ascending the tree of life. There may be a few of you out there who have studied that or read that in a Kabbalistically based initiatory society that is using this tree, the Kircher tree. Well, that serpent ascending the tree of life that you studied, that's what he's talking about here. This is one of the many reasons I think that that is a source for the original Order of the Golden Dawn. That aside, the serpent is the path of divine energy back up the tree, the ascent of the soul. So we get to Genesis 3:5. Your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods if you eat from the tree. That is the goal of this, is to be as gods. That would be blasphemy with the common interpretation, which is why sometimes the anagogical interpretation is at odds with the literal interpretation and a mystery. It's not the only reason, but it's certainly a reason. So Adam obeys his wife. He eats from the tree. Some key points here. Adam calls his wife Eve. She gets a name as soon as he eats from the tree. He has knowledge. And the reason he gives her this name is because she's the mother of all living things. Now, before in the Monad, he has talked about Gamos Gaian, or Gameia, which he then defines as Gamos Gaian, and Gaian is a play on Gaia, the Greek mother goddess, the primordial mother goddess who gives birth to the Titans and lots of Greek mythology. Eve is the mother of all living, not because of the literal interpretation that all humans are then descended from Eve. That doesn't even make sense, actually, because if you read the Bible, there's another creation story like going on around the block. But, you know, I'll leave you to figure that one out. But Eve would, in this case, be associated with Bina. So there is the flash of energy down the tree. What gives the energy from Kether that is shot over from Chokmah form is Bina. That gives creation form, and Bina manifests creation. So Eve would be associated with this, with Bina. Adam with Chokmah. Kether with the closest one can know of God when you are in the tree that has not fallen. So now we're to Genesis 3:22. This is going to be important to D simply because of the numbers. Remember, D just loves numbers. He's obsessed with them. 22, what's that? That's the number of letters in the Hebrew alphabet that manifest all creation in the Sefer Yetzirah. That's one of the big contexts of D's letter. 3, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, the Holy Trinity, among many other things. Also with D, those other 3 things are the 3 sacred languages. So this quote is going to be a big deal. Oh, did I tell you? This quote is going to be a big deal. This is where God says, behold, the man has become as one of us to know good and evil. Behold the good tree. There is also an evil tree, a tree of shades, the clephotic tree. So anagogically, if you merge these creation stories, that's what you have. Man knows good and evil because there is this tree that you're supposed to work up the paths of as ascent back to the one, but there's also an evil clephotic tree made of shades. He will conflate that also with Plato's idea of shadow and the Republic, lots of other things we talk about in my class on the monad. And now lest he put his hand and take off of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Now you might, if you have studied Kabbalah a lot, Hermetic Kabbalah, not Rabbinic Kabbalah, you might say here, well, wait a minute. Adam is in Tifereth. So why do we need to ascend from down here? It's because the tree itself has fallen in Hermetic Kabbalah, just like in Rabbinic Kabbalah, and that's going to bring up a question I'm going to get to in a minute, which is how much did Dee know about actual Rabbinic Kabbalah as opposed to, say, the Kabbalah of Reuchlin, or, and we don't know because Dee's great Kabbalistic work has been lost. We just know he collected Kabbalistic works. Let's go on here. But this is about living forever. Living forever is metempsychosis. It is the idea that the soul survives death. That is in Greek philosophy as well as Christian, Jewish thought, lots of other places. In fact, most human cultures, to be honest, all of them that I'm aware of. So in Genesis 3:23 and 3:24, you have the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. That's the expulsion from Tifereth of the original Adam. Therefore, the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the earth whence he was taken. Thus he cast out the man, and at the east side of the Garden of Eden he set the cherubims and the blade of the sword shaken to keep the way of the tree of life. The blade of the sword shaken is another way of talking about this lightning flash of energy down the tree, is as the flaming sword. So that's the sword that is shaken because the vessels, the Sephiroth, have shattered. And so to go back up, you have to start, you have to ascend back up the tree. This raises a very important question that I leave for you. That is, how much could Dee have known about the rabbinical idea of the tikkun olam, that is the healing of the vessel, the concept that after the vessels are shattered, you do good works, and your good works help heal the world. The problem with this idea, what he says meshes with it perfectly. But Rabbi Luria, who is most associated with the practice of tikkun olam, is still in Egypt. He hasn't even started teaching. He goes to Jerusalem, I think in 1572, anyway, around then. One can argue, and in fact, I have argued it, that it is very, very possible that a couple decades later, when Dee and Kelly are in Prague, that there are learned men in Prague who are Jewish, who are from Jerusalem, who are around the great Rabbi Low in Prague. And we see in Dee's diary that someone, probably Kelly, is often going to visit the Jews. Okay, you could make an argument that it's possible for Dee and Kelly to know about tikkun olam. I don't see any way you can do it here, honestly, but the ideas do mesh. What I am looking for still is an idea of tikkun olam expressed before Rabbi Luria that Dee could have known about, but it could be that the ideas just happen to mesh, and that's all. Anyway, I hope you enjoy John Dee's Adamic Aesopian fable. It's one of my favorite parts of the letter, and it is not at all what it appears to be, but it's a beautiful, beautiful story. Okay, thanks a lot for joining me today.